Thanks, Nick. Well, I'm Ray Colón-López. I'm currently serving as the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. I am the fourth person to hold the position, and my time is coming to an end here on 3 November. Um, my career in the Air Force, I came in as a transportation specialist, was not faring too well in that career field, and a couple of PJs ended up making me the pitch about, hey, have you ever tried this? This, meaning pararescue, and was able to go through the pipeline, made it. First assignment to Holloman Air Force Base, the 48th Rescue Squadron. Then spent about close to a decade at the 24th Special Tactics Squadron with a break in between being the commandant of the PJ school. And after the 724th, after I was the group superintendent for the unit, I got selected to become the first SAO, Special Operations Wing Command Chief. And then I went on the Command Chief track, and here we are today.
Where did you grow up, and what motivated you to get into the Air Force?
I grew up in a small coastal town in the southwest of Puerto Rico, and I was just the average kid, just very low income family. We had some great times on the island, and unfortunately, jobs dried up, and my father had to make a decision to move to the United States to go ahead and seek a better life. So they came into Queens, New York, and then Bridgeport, Connecticut, where we settled. My motivation to come in the Air Force was nothing more than getting the hell out of the ghetto. I needed some independence. I needed some discipline in my life, and I drove by the recruiter office one day, and here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you came in as a transportation specialist, did you have your eyes set on PJ?
I didn't have a clue what pararescue was.
Okay.
And I came in open general for obvious reasons. I just wanted to get out of town. And when they told me that I was going to be a traffic manager, I was just like, wow, from zero to hero, manager in freaking 6 weeks. That's awesome. So I ended up doing that job for about 2 years overseas in Greece. And then it was when I returned to Texas to Randolph Air Force Base when I ran into Gary Lurie, and Gary was the one that actually made me the pitch about pararescue.
Okay.
Yeah.
What were the major challenges going through the selection course and then the pipeline?
Well, I went into the pipeline kind of blind, because Gary told me about all the cool stuff that pararescue men do, but he didn't elaborate much on the pipeline. He just said that it's tough, but I didn't know how tough. And it just so happens that we have a lot of the guys here at the reunion that went through selection with me. And I could swim, I was, grew up surfing the island. I was a very physically fit person, was probably like 150 pounds, something like that. And didn't really look into it as a challenge in that sense. The challenge really came from the many people that told me that I wasn't going to make it. Whether it was body size, whether it was like, well, nobody makes it, making generalized statements about nobody makes it through that pipeline. And I asked those people point blank, I was just like, well, have you ever tried it? And the answer was no. I was just like, so how do you know? And that was probably one of the biggest motivators outside of some of the histories when I started doing my research about pararescue, that really kept me going every day.
So you started from really humble beginnings, and I'm assuming you didn't really have your mind set on being constantly in a leadership position and rising the ranks to be the top enlisted member of the armed forces. What do you think kind of propelled your career to get to where you are now?
Funny thing about life is that the best things that happen are the things that you're least planning for. And pararescue was just a chance meeting with Gary Lurie. The whole SEAC thing, ascending to the ranks to be the most senior enlisted person in the Department of Defense, was a byproduct of consistency, humility, and reputation. Because what you see is what you get, and people knew that all along. So whenever I served with a commander, and they did their checks. Everybody had a similar story about who I was. And I have never served for a single commander that I had a previous relationship with. So it wasn't like they knew me from back in the day and we got to serve together. Everything was a cold start. So, but it was those things that actually got me to where we are today.
Okay, awesome.
So out of the pipeline, you went to the 48th.
Yes.
How was that?
It was it was an interesting time because at the time it was either Patrick, Nellis, or what was the other unit? Arizona wasn't part of the equation. Um, and of course, everybody wanted Patrick. Everybody wanted to go to the Space Coast. But then Patrick moved to Moody. So then it became kind of like, all right, so, are you going to go to Holloman, Nellis, or Moody? And myself, our class was 9 active duty, and then we went 3, 3, and 3. So I was one of the 3 that ended up going to Holloman Air Force Base. And not the best place, man. There was nothing out there at the time, and it's grown quite a bit since then. But the unit dynamics were great. It was a very tight team. When you don't have many options outside of the gate, the team tends to grow stronger. And man, it was just a great time to be there. I got to cut my teeth on the rescue side of things, doing the Northern Watch and Southern Watch rotations. A lot of civil rescues out of Holloman because of the White Sands, and also helping the guys out in Albuquerque whenever they had some civil SAR. And it was just also a great opportunity to learn from some great NCOs, including, then Tech Sergeant John Ray Kingsley. John was a Marine, Second Force Recon, that ended up coming into pararescue, and he ran that team like a platoon. And he was very strict. It was very high on standards, and a perfectionist in every sense when it came to the way of the military. So we got to learn quite a bit from John. But it was a great assignment to go ahead and cut your teeth as a brand new J.
Any notable missions while you were there?
No, not really notable. If you remember those days, everybody was waiting for the big mish. There was nothing really big happening, and then these rotations, Southern and Northern Watch were just very episodic. You sat alert and nothing really happened. We used that time to train, and that was basically the common theme at that unit. One particular Turkey rotation, when we were doing Northern Watch, we had the opportunity to go on an R&R trip, and we ended up rescuing a drowning woman. And it was me, Bob Simmons, Troy Naquin, and Joel Conroy that were on that one particular, save. But outside of that, man, they kept me in the confines of pararescue supply, and that's why I decided to apply for the 24th, because I wasn't really getting much. Yeah.
So while you were the 24th, you obviously were a part of a lot of missions. Your first Bronze Star with Valor was while you were attached to, Hamid Karzai's security detail. Choked up on my words there. Can you explain that mission to us?
So, if you recall, after the beginning of the global war on terror, we had troops that came through the north, with the Northern Alliance, and we had another group that ended up going into the Kandahar area that exfilled, President Hamid Karzai. When he got reinstated into power, a group of Tier 1 operators got the mission to provide his personal security. It was a challenging mission. He was a very proud man, liked to walk everywhere, which basically raised the spidey senses every time. There were a couple of attempts on his life. And every day was pins and needles, man, because you just didn't know what you were going to get. But there were a few airmen in that mission attached to those special operations teams, and Eric Degner, as a matter of fact, was one of the other PJs that was on that detail.
Gotcha.
And you actually have 2 Bronze Stars. Can you talk about that the second one, or the mission that led to the second Bronze Star?
Yeah, a high value target ended up getting rocked on the way in. Small arms fire to the helo. ended up chasing down a couple of guys that were actually the ones targeting the aircraft, and we ended up taking them out. And by those actions, we ended up preventing them probably shooting an RPG into one of the Chinooks coming in. It was a very quick mission from the beginning, and then we ended up spending the majority of the evening at that target site doing a site survey exploitation. There were a lot of drugs, basically, they were using to fund, their way to and from Pakistan, and a huge weapons cache that we ended up destroying in place. But that was the second mission.
Okay. So you, in the beginning of the war, you guys obviously took away quite a bit from the missions that you were conducting, especially out of the 2-4. What were some of the big takeaways that you could bring to the rest of the force for pararescue, for who you were fighting?
At the time, we were experimenting as we were operating. There were a lot of gear challenges because, I mean, the Department of Defense writ large never really trained to a standard for counterinsurgencies. So the early days in Bagram, you had this tents, and then you had this young PJs. You're talking most of us E5, E6s, asking the questions, what if we fill the blank? So working with the extrication tools, try to cut weight, jerry rigging some of those battery powered coolers to use 5590 batteries to be able to keep blood cold. All of those things, the cat tourniquet, all of these things were born from what if we did it this way. The other thing that we ended up doing is a lot of gear configuration. So going from the Rhodesian vest to actually getting the modular vest that you see today, using the Mali system, all of that stuff was basically developed in the ground in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we'll bring it back to the rigger shop at the 24th. Then we'll go ahead and configure our kit, and then we'll bring it back. And then, Tactical Tailor and all of these other companies, they started, mass producing the stuff that we were actually building. But a lot of that stuff that you guys were today, I mean, that was basically the ideas of people that were just on the ground fighting the war at the time.
I think it's impressive. We sat down with Bob LaPointe, and we also sat down with Leif Arvidsson, and they were fighting with nothing. I mean, they didn't even have medical equipment.
Yeah.
And then we move on, and there's a distinct generation now. We're back at war, and we think we have what we're well equipped for. But it's cool that during that war, we kind of recollected and said, all right, this is what the force needs. Let's start manufacturing the new stuff. Yeah. And that's PJ creativity, in my opinion. For sure.
Oh yeah, and you're talking guys like Rob Gregg, Chris Telsworth, Mike Atkins. It was always, man, a challenge to see who was going to develop the next best thing. Something as minute as taking a Petzl Tikka headlamp. The headlamp used to get in the way of the nods on the helmet. Taking a piece, just a piece of Velcro, and 1 inch fits perfectly through the Petzl, and then just putting it on the side right here so it wouldn't interfere. Next thing you know, somebody's mass producing that stuff. I mean,
making money.
Probably charging $50 for that piece of Velcro now.
I'm sure.
You have airsofters running around with them now.
Yeah, everybody knows the government system. $24,999 or below. Yeah. Telsworth was his chief.
Yeah.
AK was my chief. As I was growing up, what do you think about your generation of PJs at the 2-4 that led to so much success?
Well, we were hungry, every single one of us. Remember that we came in at the time that the Cold War was a thing of the distant past. We didn't really have the big missions. Obviously, the episodic rescues that took place in Bosnia were about as sexy as the missions got. And then every once in a while, the Tier 1 force will get some sort of mission that you, if lucky enough, were on alert to go ahead and deploy and get the big mish, as they used to call it. But when the flag went up after September 11th, man, all of those hungry dudes, they were ready to get after it. And they took it serious. I mean, that some of the bravest men I know were part of those 2 green teams that ended up being there at the 24th prior to GWAT. and still friends to this day. We have lost some of them, but man, you know, I will do anything for any one of them.
Well, yeah, that's really motivating.
Yeah.
So you were actually in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan.
A couple of crash landings.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was just, man, you know, the brownouts were horrible back in those days, and you're talking the early stages of the war. We're still trying to figure out a lot of things. We didn't have, 10 lines of ISR soaking a target. We were just going in blind, most of it. And a lot of the stuff that we were doing were also experimental techniques, tactics, and procedures. We had a big problem with squirters, which basically meant that they will hear the helicopters coming through the mountain pass, and then they will just go. So once we started getting ISR on board, we started gauging on timing to see, okay, so this is how long they hear, and this is where they typically go. So you ran a couple of dummy missions like that to spook them, and then you figure out where they were, and then you came in with a ground assault force to basically do the cordon to make sure that you catch them. It was like a bad episode of Cops. So, but in doing some of that stuff and trying to find those landing sites, man, we had some pretty hard landings. And in that one particular case, they broke one of the rotors. It was pretty sporty, man. My front plate went through my jaw and just rocked the hell out of me. And up to this day, man, my jaw clicks when I when I talk. But yeah, those were the days.
You were awarded, you're one of 6 awarded the Air Force, I want to read this correctly, Combat Action Medal in June of 2007. Your actions led to that. What happened that day?
On the...
For the Air Force.
Oh, the Air Force Combat Action Medal. So as we were getting deeper and deeper into the war, the Department of the Air Force realized that they didn't really have a way to recognize people for combat engagement. All of the other services had the combat action ribbon, the combat infantry badge. The Air Force had nothing. The only thing that the Air Force had remotely close to it was the combat readiness medal, which basically, if you were at a unit that was combat ready, you got it. So there was really no incentive in there. So the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, I believe it was mostly at the time, he said, no, we need to do better by our airmen. These guys and gals are getting after him. We need to have some kind of proper recognition for them. So when the mission, or when the medal was actually developed, they picked 6 vignettes from across the Air Force that they wanted to go ahead and have the inaugural ceremony for. And it just so happens that I was the pararescueman that got chosen for that. Not because of my actions. I think it was more timing than anything else.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
We have gone over quite a few of your most notable awards, I'd say. But is there anything that hasn't been recognized that you'd say is like one of the most memorable missions that you have, or most impactful missions?
Well, the Karzai mission definitely, and for a lot of different reasons. I mean, as a young PJ, you don't realize the strategic impact that your actions are going to have based on, who you're protecting and what your mission is to keep them alive. As we got to see the war unfold over the next 20 years, that became more and more clear of the importance of having people, the right people in power. And we got to see how quickly the Afghan government fell with the wrong person in charge, somebody that just ended up skipping town, little to no warning, and then everything just kind of like falls apart. But I think those missions, and they remind you that, man, you have to really be cognizant of the value that you bring to that team. In my case and in Eric's case, if Karzai was shot, man, we were the ones responsible for keeping him alive. Imagine being responsible as an E5 to keep the president of a country alive. So when you start putting it into that context and you start thinking about, the responsibility that you had at such a young age, man, it really hits home. It really hits home. And then when you come to the position of SEAC and you're sitting across the table from the Taliban, negotiating the exit terms, that is even more surreal. especially when you have two people sitting across the table that you were personally involved in the missions that got them to Guantanamo Bay. Talk about weird. Yes.
I could only imagine the amount of professionalism you had and restraint you had to have in those moments.
There was no restraint. And I think General Milley was very, very pointed with them. You know, I won't say exactly what he told them, but basically he felt sure it's like, if you violate these terms, I will personally kill you. Then he pointed out to the other members that were at the table and said he was personally responsible for getting you to Guantanamo Bay, and he won't hesitate to do it again. You know, if you guys violate these terms, I will personally kill you. So
That's a leader right there. Who are your mentors as you grew up? And you've obviously been with some of the top profile members of our armed forces and politics. Who do you think is like a good mentor for people to look at?
Well, I'll use my own personal experience because, you know, going through the pipeline, the other motivation that I had was 2 airman magazines. One was Scotty Guerin's story when he ended up almost dying in that horrendous parachuting accident. And the other one was the article on Gothic Serpent, the Battle of Mogadishu, with Scotty Fales, Jeff Bray, and Tim Wilkinson. So those were really the people that I was looking up to at the time, you know, as a role model. It's like, man, if those guys did it, man, I need to go ahead and do my part, you know, because I always saw military service once I got into the pipeline as a generational commitment, you know, to make sure that you fill the shoes of the people that ended up packing the mail before us. But when I became a brand new PJ, Wayne Fisk was the person that actually became my mentor. You know, Wayne and I developed a father-son relationship that's still well and alive to this day. And I hate that he couldn't be here for the reunion. But Wayne and I became really close, and we're still very close. And he taught me a lot about how to be a gentleman and how to be a PJ. And man, I owe that man a lot.
Yeah, wow. We like to talk about Charlie every single time someone comes on, or the camaraderie and brotherhood that we have inside of our community. We're talking about a lot of heavy stuff, but is there anything lighter that experiences with Charlie that you've had in your career? Some fun stories?
We keep going back to the same people that we talk about, you know, going back to Eric Digner and Mike Atkins. So we had Charlie at the 24th, and we were in the team hooch, you know, having a couple of drinks, and Charlie came out, right? Now, Atkins had just created some mayhem. I think it was at a Canadian PJ reunion. And him, Steve Billman, and there was a third PJ that was involved in it. So they took Charlie and they brought him back to the 24th. So most of the guys were team guys, and there were a couple of outsiders. And after the night kept on going on, you know, we were like, well, let's go ahead and bring it back to the house. Let's go ahead and shut this down, and let's have a couple more drinks. So we ended up going to my house, and Charlie came with us. And it was Bob Simmons, me, Josh Schwartz, a couple of other PJs were still at the house. Brent Manny was one that was not part of the unit, but he came out to the house to hang out. So it's getting probably close to 11. Everybody's leaving the house, and I go to the bathroom. Josh takes a call on his phone. We were the last 3 there drinking. And when we come back and sit to the table and starting to pour a beer, and Josh goes, "Where's Charlie?" And I'm like, "Where's Brent?" His car is going. I'm like, "Mother." So immediately I'm losing my mind, because I'm like, man, I'm going to be that guy that just gave up Charlie to this broke PJ, you know, and man, how am I going to be able to do this? And then, of course, there's Mike Atkins at the other side of the equation that ended up having a pretty tough fight to get Charlie to the 24th, right? So Josh and I started putting our heads together, and we didn't know where Brent lived, but we knew where his wife worked. So we went to the bar where his wife was working, and we just kind of like sweet talk. And she's like, "Oh yeah, no, we just live right up the road." And she's like, "Yeah, where do you guys live?" So she gave us the address. So we get in Josh's truck. We drive to the apartment, and he was on a second deck. And the apartment is one of those inner stairwells, and then you have the big glass door that goes to like the little balcony. So the breaching plan was number one, primary entry was going to be the door. Secondary entry was a chair through that glass door and go right in and get him because he was watching TV. He was wearing sweats. It was a pretty cold night. It was probably about 35, 40 degrees outside. For Fayetteville, that's cold. And I go for the doorknob and it's wide open. So he's like, "Oh, man." I was like, "Oh, yeah, buddy, come on." So we hog-tied him. We threw him in the bed of the truck. Still, no shoes, just a pair of sweats and no shirt. And Brent had just, he was recovering from a bad parachuting accident, so he had all kinds of hardware on his spine. So we take him to Eric Degner's place. Eric ended up, he bought a house in the boonies. I mean, you could shoot guns. I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere in Fayetteville. And so Atkins was his roommate. And so we brought Brent over there to go ahead and get him to tell us where Charlie was. And he wouldn't talk. So he ended up getting out of the truck and ended up just squirming his way into these bushes. So we had to go ahead and look for him for a while, which was really frustrating. And Atkins was really, really frustrated too. So we lay him out, and start hosing him down, cold water. And it was cold, man. It was cold. And he still wasn't budging. So Eric had an idea of putting a shot collar on him. And he knew that his Harley sets off the shot collar, so we put that on Brent, and a couple of rounds of shocks. He ended up singing like a canary. So we went back, got Charlie out of his office in J. Somsey, and that was it.
Wow.
It's a great story.
Yeah, I've heard Brent Manny has saved quite a few PJ's careers in SOMC. That's pretty cool. It's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Do you happen to have the green feet?
What was that?
Do you have the green feet tattoo?
Of course. Which
There we go.
freaking
Yeah.
country-loving PJ doesn't have green feet, man?
Good to hear. Good to hear.
But Wayne still gets at me because I'm one of the four-toe green feet guys. Yeah. From back in the day, and Wayne is like, it was never supposed to be 4 toes, it was supposed to be 5, so I never got the 5th toe put on it, and I don't think at this age I'm going to be getting a 5th toe put on my feet.
You were the guest speaker at my graduation in 2015, and you gave me a carnivore coin, the carnivore mindset. I still have it. We have kind of like 2, and it's a little bit larger questions like at the end of these interviews. What is do you think, like the best advice you can give to a future PJ, young or a guy who's looking to rise the ranks, similar to what you've done in your career?
Humility-based leadership. You never let your head get too big. You never let the missions get to you. You accept failure because it's a learning experience and because you're trying your best to go ahead and put yourself to the limit to figure out exactly who you are, what you can and cannot do. But without humility, you tend to lose quite a bit. Things become about you and less about the team. And I think that has been a critical ingredient on the way that I have approached leadership. So,
one other major question that we like to ask, because this whole project is designed to archive the legacy of our brotherhood. So what would you say is your legacy, or what would you like your legacy to be?
Oh, that's a tough one because, as the career is coming to an end after 33 years of service, I believe that the biggest legacy that we can leave anyone behind us is an example to follow, a positive example, because you can have negative examples, right? But to leave, the young career field an example of like, man, this is what a pararescue man can do. In my case, to step out of the career field and rise to where I'm at right now, it shows PJs the capabilities that we bring to bear. That an administrative person is not necessarily suited because they have checked all the blocks to be able to make it to a certain position. That an operator can do that because of the way that we think, the way that we act, and the reputation that we hold. So if I were to pick something about a legacy man, I will hope that young pararescue men see me as an example of what can be done in and out of the career field.
So what's next for you?
Well, when you fill these E10 positions, I mean, you never really go away from the Department of Defense. You have a lifelong commitment to the troops. I'm going to stay involved fighting for things, not only for the career field, but for the services as the joint senior enlisted leader. I'm going to continue to lobby to make sure that we properly compensate and equip people, specifically dealing with pay and compensation for the force, the total force. And I'm going to stay involved in certain think tanks that actually bring facts to industry on the needs of the warrior. All of those things, there's plenty of opportunities out there, and it's amazing the impact that you can still make for people, after you retire. And a lot of it has to do with the influence that you have by who you used to be and the relationships that you have built over the years. So,
My last question, and it's something I've always been curious about. You talked about influence. In your position as SEAC, what are some of the things that you're influencing on a daily basis for the armed forces?
well, I am a very, very common sense approach type of person, and sometimes the ideas that get placed on the table don't really pass that common sense test. And you have to have the courage to be able to just call it out when you see it, and you have to have the courage and the gumption to not back down even when the pressure gets put on you. I've done that every time, all the time, and it actually affects policies that are not specific to any service, but for the Department of Defense. And the other thing that you're doing at the time is making sure that you are properly advising the Secretary of Defense and the chairman to make the right decisions. And it is not an easy task, especially when you have certain people that come in and out of the Department of Defense, political appointees as an example. They bring a certain menu of agendas that they would like to push through. Some may not pass the test of the test of time, that this is something that we want to commit to a long term, and we try to go ahead and make sure that we mitigate the impact that some of those decisions have to the total force. But speaking truth to power, that's what that means. It's just making sure that you speak from the heart and that you stick to the facts and how the force is going to receive it.
I feel like there's so many things that we could learn from you as far as lessons. And one of the last things I'd like to ask is your balance between the responsibilities you have at work and your career from the 24th to now. How are you able to balance that and also like a family?
Family. Well, there's no such thing as balance. Balance means that you will have equal footing and maintain a steady rate. I believe in priorities. If you know what your priorities are, you tend to make life work. Specifically with my family, my wife Janet. You have to figure out the things that are basically the red line for her. These are the most important things, and you better make the time to make those things happen. And then the ones that you can potentially negotiate with. But if we get into the habit of, number one, knowing what those key things are for your family that you must do, and then you not balance, but you gauge it against, your duty commitments, what you need to do, you tend to have a common understanding. And that understanding meaning that I'm not going to be able to do that all the time, but I'm going to fight like hell to make sure that I do my best to be there. And if that effort is put forth, your family tends to understand more when you cannot do it, because they know that you're really trying your best, but something is precluding you from doing that.
Yeah, we asked that same question to Rick Prado, and he had a similar answer. He basically told us that having some transparency and like having your significant other understand the roles and the responsibilities that you have at work, they tend to sympathize a little bit more and have a better understanding and understand, your role and the importance that you have.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, yeah, that transparency is critical too. You have to be fully open, and there cannot be anything left to speculation when it comes to communication with your family. And some of us have failed at that at one point or another. But if you're learning from it, man, you become a better man for it.
Well, thank you for sitting down with us. I know you're really busy out here at the reunion, but it means a lot to us that you would want to come on and give us a little bit of time.
And I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing because I think this is going to be very critical. Right now, we are on a halftime show to the next big fight, all right? And people are trying to figure out, all right, do we go ahead and readjust things? What is that we're going to be doing in the near future? What is that is going to be required of me? And now is the time to go ahead and figure all of that out. Remember when I brought it back to the way that we used to deal with our gear at the tents in Afghanistan? It was discovery as the fight went on. When we get involved in strategic powers, potentially strategic war with people that are near peers, it's going to be different and it's going to be more challenging. And I don't think that we're going to have the time to go ahead and do those things. Maybe we will make certain things work, but the one thing that we need to concentrate on right now is to be able to have the proper training, make sure that we're looking at every single possibility because there's probably going to be a lot of things that are going to need recovery in a strategic power war. And who better than us to be able to get behind enemy lines and do whatever we need to do. So this podcast and the stories of like Bob LaPointe, Rick Prado, hopefully you will get Wayne Fisk at some point. That's the motivation that is going to drive that next generation to get after that fight. When I was a young pup, obviously talking to the Vietnam vets, a lot of them who are still walking around here, just ran into Doug Horka here not long ago. But these are the decorations that we used to read at the schoolhouse, the portraits that we used to see. And at the time when I was just a young pup, man, I wasn't worried about what uniform we were going to wear, what changes we need to do. Man, I was concerned about, it's like, man, I went through SEER training and that was pretty challenging, right? But tell me, Art Black, how really bad was it when you were in captivity? And then going to people like Wayne Fisk, hey, how is it like to be in a troops in contact situation? Tell me, how do I prepare myself to do that? We need this generation to start looking into that, start reaching out to people like Chris Telsworth, Mike Atkins, Kevin Baum, all of these guys that actually have a whole bunch of experience. And man, now's the time to go ahead and be ready for that next fight because we're not going to have much time after it begins.
Hoo-yah.
Man.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sitting down with us again.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, cool.